Virginia's profound population growth that's happened over the next 20 years is going to have tremendous implications for just about every industry. And what I think is incumbent upon policymakers and elected officials and community leaders is to not only understand how big a population is going to become that they're responsible for, but what it's going to be like in terms of its makeup and what expectations the citizenry are going to have. And through our research and that generational lens that I talked about, we see some significant changes and more demands that are going to be placed on some communities that aren't quite ready for it. Understanding the significant increase in population is just the surface level. Every elected official and policymaker and community leader needs to understand that population statistic and what it means for their community. Certainly if you're in the crescent, you got to manage growth. If you're in one of the rural areas, you have to start having adult conversations about being left behind. Now for the folks in the urban areas, they've got to deal with not only an increase in population, but an increase in expectations, different expectations. The best example is to think about the baby boomers and the silent generation. Silent generation, those folks that are 65 to about 85 today, are the seniors today. They grew up at a time during the 1930s, during what we call their wonder years, when they were young kids and young teenagers living in families that had to really suffer through the Great Depression in that 10-year run of the 1930s when it was really scarce resources. I mean, there was rationing for staples, and people had to move in and live together, and neighborhoods had to have neighborhood gardens, and just to make it work. You know, you hear about the soup kitchens and bread lines. There weren't the United Ways and the foundations and unemployment checks. It just didn't exist back then. So everybody had to take care of everybody. So consequently, the silent generation, as a generation, are wired to be really accepting of the status quo, to really be appreciative of anything they have, to be really sort of savers, to plan for their retirements. So today's senior is the perfect senior. They really are self-sufficient. They really have put away some savings. They really can live on modest means. And more importantly, they can accept the status quo and say, thank goodness we have some of the services we have. So the perfect group to take care of. Now, flash forward. Let's look at the baby boomers, the children of the silent generation folks. All of a sudden, this is a generation who came of age in the 1950s and early 60s. When they were kids and students, the whole world catered to them. These guys, boomers, were wired to believe that the needs of one would outweigh the needs of many, that they could get whatever they wanted because that's the way they saw life. The suburbs were taking off, the appliances were coming, our space program was taking off, everything was going their way. And if they didn't like something, they were such a sizable group, twice the size of their silent generation, that they could get what they wanted. So whether or not boomers were the leaders of Vietnam protest, or whether the civil rights movement they were leaders, isn't the point. The point is they were there as foot soldiers. They were there in changing our society into the way they wanted to shape it. Boomers, at their core, crave control and are transformative as a generation. So they abhor the status quo. They really want to get in and make it different and make it special. So when you think about the word boomers, think about how it's spelled. B-O-O-M-E-R. There's a me in boomers. And so baby boomers, as they become the new seniors, and they already started to become, because the first one has turned 65, and now the oldest boomer is 66. So over the next 20 years, these baby boomers, me-oriented folks, are going to become the new seniors. And as they make this transition, which is called the age shift, or Ken Dykewald calls it the age wave, as they make this shift, there are going to be twice as many seniors in every community as there are today, because there are twice as many baby boomers, basically, as they are silent generation seniors. That's why it is the age shift, the age wave. Well, I think this age shift, the age wave, has profound implications for communities, rural and suburban and urban communities. Think about the way we take care of our current seniors. A lot of it is around group homes and around nursing homes. Today's seniors really learned about the longevity bonus of living to be 80 years old kind of at the end of their life. But boomers taking care of their parents are noticing this and going, oh my gosh, I'm going to live to be 85 or 90. So they're getting the longevity bonus kind of early in their life. When they're 50 and 60, they're seeing this. And so through our research, we're realizing that boomers are rejecting that model of saying, let me go off and live in a nursing home. Let me go off and live in a group home. And they're taking stock in where they live now, many of them experiencing that empty nest syndrome where their kids now are off at college and are saying, you know, I want to remain vital. I want to remain part of my community. So there's a term that a lot of people have used called aging in place. And so boomers don't want to go off and age in a group home or nursing home. They want to age in their own home or age in place. So the implication this has on communities is that we need a new model for housing. It's not the suburban model where you're going to have boomers sort of trapped behind the geraniums as the reality of trying to drive when they're older hits in. So what we're seeing already is sort of a flight to walkable communities. You know, 15-minute communities is a great term where you can live and have an encore career or a part-time job in retirement and go get all of your staples, your food, and all of your health care, all within 15 minutes. And so we're going to see more and more of these sort of villages take place with retail on the first floor and living above it. And you can already look around and see places like Arlington County catering to this sort of desire, to where you have these mixed-use, highly walkable, transit-oriented development communities. And so that model is going to pick up steam as more and more boomers look to escape the suburbs and move back towards more of the densely populated areas. Understanding these deep-seated generational issues is important on so many levels. One level is just how the younger populations, the Gen Xers and Gen Ys, literally view the home as part of their investment portfolio. The older generations really put home at the center, and the goal was to own a home. And once you owned a home, you usually stayed in it and didn't really flip them or trade up. You just you might have moved up as your family got larger, but your home was the central investment. And it seemed on paper and from just daily discussions that home values kept increasing slowly over time. So it was something that you could really count on. And you look forward to paying off that mortgage, if you will. This younger generation has lived through perhaps one of the most horrific housing slumps in modern times and watched the value of homes drop really like a rock, as well as watching so many people lose their homes. And listening to the media talk about the future of homes. And I think what it's done to their wiring is that they don't put home ownership at the center of their investment strategy. At the same time, they are watching all this talk take place about Social Security. And so in the research we do for financial clients, we see Gen Ys and Gen Xers saying, it's not going to be here for me. They've already sort of given up on that idea. And so for them, they're fiercely independent and really want to take care of themselves. And so they're becoming very conservative and really want to spread out their investments and not have everything in one basket or at one home, if you will. And I think this is a trend that's here to stay. On the other end of the generational scale are the millennials. often called Gen Ys. So I'm going to use Gen Y as the term for them. This is the youngest generation, aged 10 to about 30. And so every community is blessed with these young folks. In fact, some communities are even embarking on ambitious marketing campaigns to try to attract these folks because they realize they need them in their workforce long term. Understanding Gen Ys and what they want is just as important as understanding baby boomers and where they're headed into retirement and their implications on communities. This group was influenced so much by hyper-parenting, helicopter parenting, and by technology, the ubiquitous nature of technology where they are hyper-connected literally 24/7. In fact, in some of their research, I think 85% of Gen Y sleep with their cell phones right next to their head. So this generation, we call them the group that has collective consciousness, the collective self. So they don't ever want to experience anything alone, and they don't have to, because they can take all their buddies with them through that constant texting and being hyper-wired. So these two things together have created kind of a new citizen and new expectations. And when we talk to this group about their living needs and their housing needs and where they want to live, they tell us, first and foremost, they don't want a car. That it's not that they're anti-car, they just don't see the need for it. They would rather live in an urban setting where they can be hyper-connected with each other and be in constant contact and create a new sort of urban model, which is all about sustainability and all about helping one another. And I think that comes back from sort of the way we raise them and their ambition to really create something new. So this young generation has the most promise of all of our generations to create something very exciting and dynamic for America and for the communities that they choose to live in. These are the two biggest tailwinds that are really transforming forward-looking communities, that are seeing boomers' needs and desires to move beyond the geranium so they're not trapped out in suburbia, to look at those places in their community that can really offer this higher density, 10 or 15 minute walkability to everything. And at the same time, the Gen Ys are looking for that very same thing, but for different reasons. And so together, these two generations are really going to redefine urban living as we know it. Yeah, well, another huge shift that's happening in America and across our Commonwealth as well is the shift in household makeup. And a lot of people, I think, especially people 50 and older, when we think about what does the quintessential American household look like, the nuclear family, we see mom and dad and two kids. And I'm certain that that model has been blown up a long time ago. When we look at population growth and the makeup of America today, we see a different nuclear family. We see a lot of shifting in the atoms that have taken place. So I can give you a couple of big examples. One is when you look at head of household, you traditionally would think about a two-headed household. Now a third of all households are headed by a single person. And it may be that they've lost someone, or it may be that they chose never to have someone. But a single head of household representing a third of our society is huge. And when you look deeper on who are these people that are heading up these single households, it predominantly is women. And this has profound implications. If the household, if there's a single head of households really headed by women, and if most households, the primary breadwinner is headed up by a female, then you have to think about the decision makers and what's going on inside the household. And I can tell you from a lot of the research that we do for financial institutions that want to help people plan for the future, they are trying to retrain people, mortgage brokers and investors, to stop looking at just the man in the conversation, that you need to spend at least half your time, if not more, focused on the female. But it has implications in terms of the decision on where people are going to live. in how we're going to market to them and what kind of products we're going to offer, that the female preferences are taking on a much more dramatic and profound impact on decisions. Okay. Another big shift that we're seeing in the family makeup is the move back to multiple generation families. The sad reality is that we haven't seen increases in real wages over the last 5 or 6 years, and the fact that more and more households are sort of living on the edge. Right now, 1 out of 5 have had a serious setback and lost 25% more of their disposable income in the last year, and that number used to be 10%. So there's been a doubling of that. So you have more and more people under financial stress, and it really runs across all the generations. And so as a consequence, when you understand that transportation, the cost for transportation and the cost for housing represent 50% of your income in terms of what you need to get by, that is so expensive that we're seeing now different generations of families coming together under one roof. So it's not just the parents and the children, but now you're having grandchildren and grandparents. So you're having multiple generations all under one roof. And this is the way it was in the 30s. But now the trend is that we're going back to that. We're going to see more and more of that. So right now we're at about 16% of households, and we think that's going to grow even higher. And so the consequence for developers and builders and real estate professionals is to think about living arrangements that give you some autonomy still living in that structure. There may be 2 entrances, for instance, on a house. There may be a couple of rooms that really are designated for older relatives, that they can still feel like they're independent, but yet they're part of that structure, that family structure. One of the things that forward-looking communities need to do is change their ordinances to allow garages to be converted into granny flats. And we're seeing a lot of communities doing just that. We're often asked to do studies for clients about what's the post-recession going to look like. And we often say, well, we don't need to do a study to tell you. We just see so many signs pointing to what we call the new fru, or the new frugality. I guess you could also call it sort of the new age of responsible consumerism, that we really have been taught a huge lesson by this recession. But there's more going on to this new fru than just the recession. It really started back with the Green Movement, when the Green Movement went mainstream. Think before the recession, back in 2005, 2006, a lot of us were really embracing green behavior. And you remember back then Walmart saying, no, we're going to sell all green light bulbs, and we're going to push America in that direction. And boy, we all went there. 8 out of 10 of us now call ourselves green. And it used to be green was tree huggers, but now green is mainstream. And that green movement introduced us into some smart, savvy practices. I mean, if you actually turn the lights off at night when you leave the room, you save money. And if you buy a toaster oven that looks like it's not going to break in 6 months, well, you're not paying for another toaster oven. So the green movement morphed into the sustainability movement. And it really did so in a mass scale across the country. And so we became much more sensible about our purchases and our orientation on products. And we sort of abandoned this idea of planned obsolescence, that cars aren't supposed to break at 100,000 miles. Well, the recession came without a warning in 2007. And that put an exclamation point on this new fru, that we're not only green, we're not only sustainable, but wow, half of Americans were personally affected by the recession. You know, hit in income, 401k becoming a 201k, or losing a job, or a family member losing a job. And so this recession changed our wiring, and it took us back to sort of the 1930s idea of really making the most out of every resource we have. Another recession could happen. We don't seem to be coming racing out of this one. And in fact, we're not racing out of it because of this new fru. And we see this being a very long-term trend, that we are a consumer-driven economy 70% of our economy. It gets back to individual consumer consumption. And what we're seeing are consumers now, the vast majority of them, living by a budget, which they weren't doing before the recession. We're seeing the vast majority of consumers now living in the land of what their needs are, not what their wants are.